Okay, so we're going to start off right where we left last time. We've scanned the drawing in, it's got our layout, we're ready to go, we know where the devices need to go, but we're stuck with this drawing we scanned in. You're not always going to be working with the drawing you've scanned in. Sometimes you have a PDF you've downloaded off of an email, or you just have a JPEG because somebody took a picture of the drawing out in the field or something. But you're generally going to have some form of image in here. And you're just having the image right now. You can gather a lot of information just by clicking on it. So you start off without it being selected, click on it to select it, and you'll see the dots surrounding it as well as the cross in the center. Now these are very important because you need to understand what they each do. The left and the right will control the width of the drawing. I'm going to go ahead and click undo so that we go back to where we were. Both of them do the same thing. From each side you're squishing it in. Okay, so the left side is remaining the same because I dragged the right dot out. Okay, and so it's stretched from the left to the right because I dragged the right dot. And so it's getting wider and wider to the right. Okay, I'm going to undo that again. So that way we're back to our original. The corners will drag it proportionately. Well, I guess before we do that, the tops and bottoms do the same equivalently, but they do it to the height instead of the width. So this is dragging from the bottom and stretching it up. So the bottom remained where it was, but the actual view of the drawing itself is what has changed. Or rather, is why it looked like the top didn't move, but the bottom did, because I drug it off the screen. So now I'm dragging the bottom, the top's remaining in place, and the bottom is being drug out. Okay. If you click to the right of the undo, it'll show you a history of everything you've done. And you can undo multiple things at once. So that's a cool little feature you can use. Selecting it again to reselect it, like I was saying, dragging from the corner drags it proportionally. This is extremely important because if you don't do that, whenever you're scaling something, your whole scale is going to be off. Because presumably whatever you're starting with is that 1-to-1 scale, or at least proportionate to itself. You can use this to make it bigger or smaller, to increase or decrease the scale, but since we've done that, we've messed up the whole thing, so we're going to go put it back to where it was. So all the way back. Okay, so like I was saying, we can find out a lot of interesting information just by selecting it. Once we select it, we can see that this is the object. We can drag it around, move it around. Now I'm just moving it, I'm not affecting the drawing in any way. But we can look over here in the upper left-hand corner. This is telling where it's at, the center's position. Not extremely important, but it's giving us the position in relation to the drawing. This is the width of the drawing. We see it's 10.84, it's close to its actual size, and 16.84. So just by looking at these numbers and doing a little bit of rounding up, we can tell that this is an 11 by 17 drawing. It's 11 wide by 17 tall, or in actuality it would be sideways and we'd be able to see it in its actual size. If you know how you need to scale it, you can actually come over here, scale its, we'll say, width by 125%. And as soon as we did that, it increased its scale to 125%. We can do the same thing to the width, or we can do something more crazy and abstract and just stretch the whole thing and make it disproportionate. Okay, but we want to start out with the drawing just as it was, so I'm putting it all the way back again. Okay, so the other thing you can do is rotate it by a set degree. If you know you only need, like, for example, 90-degree rotation. This is going counterclockwise, I believe. Yes, counterclockwise. So I've done a 90-degree rotation. The easier thing to do is, we'll go ahead and set that back, is making the drawing go into rotating mode. Right now we're in selection mode, where we selected it and we can size it however we want. If we wanted to, we can click it again while it's already been selected, and it'll toggle it between selection mode and rotation mode. Now what this will do is this will rotate and skew the drawing based off of which axis or corner and side we select it from. So right here, as you saw, it's skewing this drawing now to the right, or skewing it to the left from the top. The bottom, once again, is remaining the same, where it's relatively similar in the corners where it started, but the top was actually shifted and dragged, and now this is a diagonal. So we're going to go ahead and set that back. Same thing with the bottom, just to show you the top stays the same. Go back, and you can skew it this way and this way as well. And if we wanted to, we can even line it back up, and it's almost exactly the same, but I don't want to take any chances. So we're setting it all the way back. Okay, so we're still in rotation mode. If we choose one of the corners, again, it'll rotate around the entire thing proportionately. So I guess the bottom half of the drawing you can say is rotating around the center, and the top half of the drawing is rotating around the center. Okay, so I've just kind of guessed and lined it up as best as I could, and it looks pretty dang straight. But again, we don't want to go with guesses or just estimations. So I'm going to go ahead and use the hotkey right now to undo, which is Control and Z, and that's just a quick little hotkey you can use to switch things back and forth. Conversely, if you wanted to put it back or go forward, Control Shift Z will go forward. So you can just go back and forth just by going Control Z and Control Shift Z. I'll be using that a lot throughout my tutorials. So if we use the Control again and click on the corner of the rotation, it will start rotating, and I believe this is 15 degrees increments. But either way around, you can use this to get a perfect 90-degree rotation. You can use this to get 180-degree rotation, 270, and 360 again, without having any guesstimation. And it's a really quick way to just make sure you rotate it from a portrait view, you could say, into a landscape view. Now, speaking of portrait and landscape, yeah, it stayed dark because it was glitched for a second. You're seeing me zoom in and out by rolling the mouse wheel. Now, something to grasp is that you are zooming in where your mouse is at. So if I put my mouse in this corner, I will zoom in relative to this corner. So I'm actually zooming into the corner. If I put it in this corner, it will zoom into that corner. Now, vice versa, when I'm zooming out, I am zooming out in relation to this corner. Okay, so if I zoom in here once, and I zoom in here once, and I zoom in here once, and I zoom in here once, I'm going to be constantly moving. And quite the opposite, if I'm moving outwards, I'm going to be moving away from that corner because I put it in the center of the drawing. So I'm pushing this section further away from me, which put my center of the screen over here. That's not where I want, so I'm going to have to push myself away from this corner, and I have now pushed myself away from that corner closer to this. It's kind of an abstract concept you need to understand, but you'll get used to it over time. Pretty much just fiddling around with it by zooming in and zooming out. You'll find out the best way to move around the drawing. The other thing you could do is actually push down on the mouse wheel and drag the whole screen around. If you drag it off the screen, sometimes it'll do weird things, but you'll get used to it over time. That's another tool you can use if you have the zoom you want, but you want to change the view. By pressing down on the mouse wheel and holding it in, you grab that spot on the screen, and you then move it to wherever you want, and you'll start looking at a new section once you let go. So you press in and hold and let go, and we're looking at this portion of the screen now. So let's go back to looking at all of it. So I just zoomed out there. Okay, so now that we've gotten the grasp of the drawing, we know it's an 11 by 17, we have it properly lined up with our drawing. You can see there's two different things here. This is the box, hold on, this is the box you can kind of see that's created by these dots. That is the actual drawing itself. When I draw it and drag it and move it around, you can see it's highlighting the entire area where the paper was scanned in. Now that's not the entirety of the drawing. There's white space there you can't see because it's on a white background. But you can also see at the tops and bottoms there's this kind of smaller outline in the center. Here, here, down to here, and here. It has its own little shadow. This is what the actual Corel Draw paper is. So we have this really big drawing that we brought in, and we placed it on top of this 8.5 by 11 drawing. You see when I select it off, the size of the paper itself that Corel has is actually an 8.5 by 11. So when you look at these two, you can clearly see that the drawing is bigger than the paper that would be printed out if we print it out right now. So what we have to do is, by using the selection of the drawing, we can actually type in the size of the paper that we want Corel Draw to see it as. Now if we just had this selected, again, we're actually seeing the drawing itself. If we typed in 17 and 11, that's going to make the actual drawing that we have selected, that we imported, bigger in just a little bit, but it'll make it an actual 17 by 11. That'll throw our scale off. We don't want to do that. Make sure if you're editing the paper itself, click off first, and then you'll be able to edit it. So we're going to make this a 11 by 17, and I have made the width 11 and I've made the height 17. So as we can see, it would have been perfect if I would have left it the other way around, but I like to be able to look at my drawing as if it's an actual drawing laid out in front of me. So I don't want my paper like this. I don't need to actually go in and change the numbers. Over here to the right is the actual layout of the paper. You can change it between a portrait view and a landscape view. And by clicking this, you actually rotate Corel Draw's paper to a different direction. Just like with the rotation tool, except for this will only go one of two ways, because the rectangle was only one of two ways, either in portrait or in landscape. So because this drawing lends itself, at least in its current point, to being a landscape drawing, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as landscape, and I'm going to drag my drawing on and try to line the two boxes up as much as I can, at least so that way it gives me a good safe area you can consider it. Because the bottom here is kind of an overlay. The printer you use may not be able to print 100% of the page. You might have to have a border based off of the printer you're using. You might have to have a border on the left and rights. You might have to have a border on the bottoms or tops. It's all depending on your printer that you're using. But typically, most have at least a little bit of a border. You can see even this drawing itself has a border of probably about 1/4 of an inch or so. Actually, yes, that is about 1/4 of an inch. So once we have our drawing set up, it's actually right here. If for some reason we wanted to print it just as it was, we'd be able to go to File, Print, everything would be set up to print. Now for example, if I have the drawing like this, and I went to print, and in fact, let's go ahead and do it. Print Preview, and we'll see that the paper that we would be printing is only printing the side. And that's because when we close the preview, it's hanging off. The whole drawing is hanging off. So we line this back up, go back into our print preview, and the size of the printer page that you need to use could also be off as well. So for example, I need to go into my print preview and change that, but I'm not going to do that right now because I don't have a printer set up for this computer. But it's showing you the center of the page. If it was going to a printer that was printing 8.5 by 11 in portrait, it would be printing this section. Most of the time, if you're not printing the right size, it's because your printer isn't configured for the right size. You'll have to go in through your driver, change some of the settings, change the paper type, or change the paper size, and you'll be printing out fine, as long as you're set up here to be on the right paper and the drawing's on the right size. Okay, so we've got manipulation down, so we're going to go ahead and continue on to the next video on editing out some of this useless information we don't need.